Agent Allwed incident. Roger Solari and Martin Farr, aged 26 and 23 respectively, wanted to map out the Agent Allwed cave system in South Wales. At the time, John Parker, another explorer, had abandoned the mission after discovering a third sump in one of its longest passages. Martin and Roger, however, wanted to keep going to see what lay beyond. The first trip was done by Martin alone, because Roger had hurt his knee, making it extremely dangerous for Martin to continue solo. Reaching the third sump was a feat in itself, since the route was not only tortuous, but also extremely long, lasting for hours, as the first sump was about a mile into the cave. The first two sumps measured only 249 feet and 82 feet, so Martin passed through them relatively easily. However, the third sump was much longer, and nobody had fully explored it yet, so Martin could only hope he had enough air to reach the end. Fortunately, he managed to swim through it, about 850 feet, and on the other side he found something else interesting, a zigzagging passage roughly 1,800 feet long, leading to another sump. Nobody had known about this fourth sump, and Martin realized he probably wouldn't have enough air to explore it and then return. He spent the next 4 to 5 hours heading back out, planning to wait for Roger so they could tackle sump 4 together on the next trip. When they returned on June 15, 1974, both Roger and Martin brought extra air tanks. They successfully reached sump 4 and began diving it with a guideline to help map the route. After about 400 feet, Roger finished his guideline, and he had sinus problems, even though it wasn't the first time. Despite this, they decided to continue. Martin then took out his own guideline and they kept going, but they made an important mistake. In cave diving, there is a concept called the rule of thirds for air consumption. If you use 1/3 of your air supply on the way in, you need another third to get out, leaving the final third as an emergency reserve. They had already used their first third and should have turned back when Roger's line ran out. Because Roger had a smaller tank than Martin assumed Roger would head out while he continued forward. He eventually came to a gravel wall of rock, which could have indicated the sump was ending, and possibly an air pocket. By this point, he was well past the halfway mark of his tank, so it was becoming extremely risky. He pushed on until he reached solid rock, confirming there was no air pocket. Spotting a passage to the right, he explored another 29 feet, but it ended in a dead end. When he backtracked, he was shocked to see Roger still there. Martin quickly signaled that they had to return. Roger, likely realizing he didn't have enough air to make it back, attempted to locate the same air pocket Martin had been searching for. Martin continued about 130 feet until his main tank ran out, forcing him to switch to a reserve tank. That would give him only about 300 feet in sump 4 and another 850 feet in sump 3, barely enough. However, he had previously placed a partially filled tank between sump 3 and sump 2, and he aimed to reach that. Finally emerging from sump 4, Martin sat on the bank, waiting for Roger, who, remember, had a smaller tank. If he didn't appear soon, it would be a huge problem. After 20 minutes with no sign of Roger, Martin realized that if Roger had surfaced from sump 4 at that moment, he likely wouldn't have enough air left to get through sump 3. After an hour, Martin was certain Roger's air had run out. Martin entered the water again and tried pulling the guideline to make it tense, but it didn't. It was no longer connected. It had been cut at about the 430-foot mark. This was probably where Roger needed to change tanks. Because switching them wasn't a simple task at the time, he might have put his arm through the line to avoid losing it, twisted his body to reach the valve, and become tangled, forcing him to cut the line to move freely. This, combined with the silt kicked up by movement, likely reduced his visibility, and he may have swum the wrong way. At that point, there was no doubt Roger had exhausted his air. Martin stayed calm and managed to navigate the next 3 sumps safely. He alerted the authorities immediately, and the search for Roger's body began. Martin himself joined the search, along with many others. However, Roger's remains were not found until 1986, 12 years later. Recovering the body was deemed too risky, so it was left in the cave, and a plaque was placed near the entrance of sump 1, in Roger's honor. In 1987, another explorer passed through sump 4, and finally located the air pocket, 875 feet in, the very one Roger and Martin had hoped to find. It was called the Against All Odds Chamber. Martin stated that after this incident, he never broke the rule of thirds again. He went on to have a remarkable diving career. Today, the entrance to the cave system is locked, and only specific, experienced divers are granted a key.